Good afternoon from the Asia Europe Foundation in Singapore, and a warm welcome to the 8th ASEF Regional Conference on Higher Education with the theme Outlook 2030, Inclusive and Diverse Higher Education in Asia and Europe. My name is Miguel Pangalangan from the ASEF Education Department, and I am pleased to be your MC today. At ARC8, we welcome participants from all 51 ASEM countries and beyond. In attendance are policymakers, university leaders, academics, student leaders, and stakeholders interested in higher education. To facilitate our interactions, allow me to first provide 3 conference guidelines. The ARC8 conference program consists of 7 sessions. First, some of you are joining us on our conference platform, and others follow us on YouTube live stream. We will help you move from one session to another with frequent announcements in the chat, and I will also guide you through the session flow. Second, our SDGQ shows we like playful elements in education settings. Some of you have requested for a certificate of attendance. And to earn this, you must listen carefully and join our ARC8 anagram game. After each conference session, I will reveal a letter from the alphabet. In total, there are 7 letters for the 7 sessions. Form a word in English or in your own language using these letters, and the certificate is yours. Third, but definitely not the least, we are proud of the diversity of participants which we have brought together today for meaningful and constructive conversations. This shall lead to joint actions. In this multicultural space, we ask everyone to act in a respectful, fair, and collaborative manner. Now I have the honor of passing the floor to Ambassador Morikawa, ASEF Executive Director, who will deliver the welcoming remarks.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a good afternoon from the Asia Europe Foundation in Singapore, and a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and participants of the ASEF Regional Conference on Higher Education, ARC8. Since ASEF's inception almost 25 years ago, diversity and inclusion have been our core values and at the heart of our mission. The 8th edition of ARC is a prime example how ASEF puts inclusion and diversity at the center of dialogue and collaboration between Asia and Europe. Since December 2020, we have been working with 25 experts on the development of the ARC8 Outlook Report 2030, Inclusive and Diverse Higher Education in Asia and Europe. The report will be launched today with the recommendations to ASEAN policy makers and university leaders to advance inclusion in higher education in the final decade of the UN Agenda 2030. As part of ARC8, ASEF has also conducted an ASEM-wide study on national equity policies in higher education and invited all ASEM ministries of education to join this first Asia-Europe equity policy mapping. The results are presented by our partner organization, the National Education Opportunity Network, today. We hope that all these would feed into the deliberations in the ASEM Education Senior Officials Meeting a few days later hosted by Germany, and the ASEM Education Ministers Meeting hosted by Thailand in December. In this regard, we thank and welcome His Excellency Dr. Anek Lau-Tamatak, Minister of Higher Education, Science, Research and Innovation of Thailand, and Mrs. Suzanne Buagen, Director General for European and International Cooperation in Education and Research of the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research. Other speakers. ARC8 is also our contribution to the UN 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. We hope that this conference will bolster the achievement of SDG 4 throughout Asia and Europe, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education, and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion does not stop today. As ARC8 spin-off activities, we plan several capacity building trainings for university and student leaders in the coming months. My sincere gratitude goes to our ARC8 experts, speakers, and moderators, and all who supported us on this project. I wish you insightful and inspiring exchanges today. Thank you.
Thank you for setting the tone, Ambassador Morikawa. It is good to hear that ARC8 is one of many initiatives of ASEF to promote SDG 4. We now proceed to the panel discussion on equity dialogue with policymakers, a university leader, and a student leader from Asia and Europe. To moderate the equity dialogue and introduce the panelists, I now pass the floor to the Director of the ASEF Education Department, Ms. Leonie Nagarajan. Leonie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Miguel. A good afternoon from Singapore to Asia and Europe. I'm delighted to moderate the ARC8 opening panel. It's an equity dialogue, diversity and inclusion on the recovery roadmap of higher education. And it's wonderful to have with us today a small multi-stakeholder group for education. We have a government representative and policymaker. We have a university leader and a student leader. Can I ask you to please put on your videos? Exactly, I can see all of you right now, wonderful. And I'm pleased to introduce first from Asia, His Excellency Dr. Kung Fock. He's the Deputy Secretary General of the ASEAN Secretariat and responsible for the ASEAN Social Cultural Community. He's also a member of the ASEF Board of Governors. His Excellency, you have worked both in the academia and the government sector, and you are currently seconded by the government of Cambodia to the ASEAN Secretariat and lead the implementation of the ASEAN Social Cultural Community Blueprint 2025. And in this blueprint, inclusiveness, sustainability, and resilience are key priorities. Allow me to quote, this strategic plan aims to lift the quality of life of its people through cooperative activities that are people-oriented, people-centered, environmentally friendly, and geared towards the promotion of sustainable development. So we look forward to hearing from you in the panel more about the activities and initiatives which are under this blueprint. Then from Asia, I have as well our university leader, Professor Dr. Zulkifli bin Abdul Razak. He's the rector of the International Islamic University of Malaysia. Professor Jul, as we gently and friendly call you in the education community, is emeritus professor, scientist, and a true thought leader in education. Your career, Jul, spans across the higher education sector and international organizations. You have been president of the International Association of Universities, and you have really a wide and excellent understanding of the higher education sector globally. So your insights are very important to us today. And now I move to Europe. Good morning, Samsung. Samsam Ibrahim is the Vice President of the European Students' Union. Samsam, you have been a student leader for over a decade now, and I would like to highlight a few milestones here. You have been the co-founder of the Association of Students Organizing for Sustainability in the UK. You have been the Vice Chair of the Muslim Leadership Foundation and the former National President of the National Union of Students in the UK. And you lead and work really a number of campaigns which are addressing societal injustices. You tackle racial injustice and climate justice. So I'm really happy that you could join us today. I know you had a busy week behind you with the executive committee meeting of ESU, but we didn't want to miss your voice and your views. With this introduction, I think we are now ready for a warm-up with this panel, a warm-up to the ARC8 conference and theme, and we will touch upon a few key questions linked to diversity, equity, inclusion. And the idea is to provide a first input for reflection. We have later other chapters where experts are going more deeper into the topic, but I still encourage the audience to put questions in the chat and also to comment in the chat if you wish to join our conversation. So let me start with our first question to the panelists, and it's a question more on a macro perspective. We have addressed this actually in our ARC8 Outlook report. The outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted how fragile the achievements of the SDGs are. And according to the Sustainable Development Goals Report 2020, COVID-19 is reversing decades of progress on poverty, healthcare, and education. We know that a green and equitable economic recovery will not be possible without the support of innovation and higher education systems. And we need a renewed commitment to inclusion in higher education. Now we are here, 2021. What do you identify as the major risk? And what do you consider is a unique opportunity for inclusive and higher education, Asia and Europe, within the next 10 years? I pass the floor first to His Excellency, Dr. Kung Phuoc.
Thank you very much, Ms. Leonie, and thank you for having me, and a very good afternoon to all colleagues, and also good morning to some colleagues who joined from Europe. And thank you very much for pointing out, the fundamental principles of our organization. I think all of us here share the same principle. It is important that our works will be as inclusive as possible, so that all of the people can benefit. I mean, if you have an opportunity to pass by our building, then there's a big billboard on top of the building that it is a community for all. But it's a long way for us to make sure that it's really achieving this ultimate goal. Of course, when it comes to the education sector, I have to say is that the issue of inequality is always there. We've been trying to make sure that we put in place policies and intervention to address all of those problems. But suddenly with the COVID-19, I think it just make the situation even more severe and challenging. I would also want to say this, that, and this is some things that you mentioned in your introductions as well. It is very clear now that some of the key targets of the SDG we may not be able to meet if we don't double our efforts, if we don't invest more. All the indications shows that we are lagging behind. So it is timely that we have these conversations. It's not just a conversation among the policymakers, but also various stakeholders as well. Now I'm asked to also to only look at like 2 or 4 among the 4 sub-themes. Let me start first with the first one, the digitalizations of the education systems. We've been trying to introduce some form of digital platform as a way to deliver education to our people. Even before the pandemic, of course, now things are on the express lane. We have to do things very quickly, and it is clear for us that not everyone can benefit from all of this. I have to say that higher education is in a better position, given the well-established systems that they have even before the pandemic. But some other level of educations, there's also a lot of challenges, especially primary level, secondary level, and all that. But then again, it is not just about adoption of technologies, and people can benefit from all of this, mode of delivery of educations, right? We need an entire ecosystems to support, the digitalizations of the delivery of educations to our people. It's not just about making sure that our people can connect to the internet. Of course, if you look at the figures, around 70% of our people have access to internet. But then it is not just about access here. We need the facility, and that is some things that we are still working on. We have the, Asean master plan on connectivity, and ICT is one of our major priorities where we are still working with partners to make sure that all of these infrastructures are in place. Prior to the COVID-19, actually we don't plan for this particular shock. We are planning, even before that. But then, all of this investment need to take a lot of time and a lot of investment. And we can see now that, some of the gaps are still there, although the governments are trying hard, working with partners, including members of the European community, to invest more in that area. But it's still, there's still a lot of things that we need to do. And it's not just about facility, tailor curriculum, quality materials. And according to our assessment, even students can plug into this online platform. If there's nobody who can assist them in learning from this platform, then they're not going to benefit much. So now we can see is that there's a lot of, issues in front of us that we need to take care of. Of course, we are now putting in place a key document to address that, and I'm sure that would be, the second question, because we are touching on more practical solutions and so on. That will emphasize more on that one. But I have to say is that for us, the biggest risk is how we are going to take this opportunity to invest it in the right way. It's not just about putting up all of this satellite equipment and producing as many platforms as possible, but also to take the opportunity to look at the gaps that we are having at the moment, all the lessons that we learned from the pandemic, and then do it in the right way, invest it in the right way, so that we don't have to face these problems again. Another issue is with the lifelong learning. Again, it is also our vision that it's going to be the future of education in the region, and also the future of work in the region. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, back in 2020, we adopted this Asean human resources development roadmap, and one of the key pillar of that roadmap is to promote lifelong learning. And it is not just the traditional way of looking at the lifelong learning, which is people can enter the education systems or re-enter when they need to obtain more skills, but also look for an innovative ways to work with different stakeholders. And in this case, I think the private sector also have an important role to support our lifelong learning priorities as well. But with COVID-19, and member states are just at the early stage of trying to integrate some of the recommendation from this roadmap into the national policies. Now they have to divert most of the resources to contain the COVID-19 and so on. So I think that is another big area for us to focus in the next 5 to 10 years. But of course, we'll touch on more of these specific issues in the second question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. While you were speaking, I see already first questions coming in. So a number of the topics which you have addressed really inspired our audience. Just to summarize, the will is there, the blueprint is there, the ASEAN Master Plan for Connectivity is there, but we need the right ecosystem to make it happen, and then see how we are allocating resources properly, efficiently, and fair. And what I find was interesting, as you mentioned, that the higher education sector is a little bit better placed than the other education sectors. And I would like to ask Professor Jewell, is that so? Do you see similar risks, opportunities than as His Excellency Kung Fock? Please, Jewell. Jewell, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Thank you very much, Leonie, and thank you very much for having me here. I'm very excited to share some of my thoughts, because this question has been there for a long time. It's only that the COVID-19 kind of exploded it and pushed it right into our face, and to have us some answers into the responses. For a long time, we feel, or at least I feel, that the higher education has always been quote unquote irrelevant to what's happening. And when we talk about global change, about climate change, global warming and stuff like that, higher education has never been at the center of it. We are just talking on the peripheral, and in this sense, I kind of echo the generation of Zamzam when Greta Thunberg says, what is the future for us? And that's why she doesn't want to go to school, because the school do not even promise a future. The future is so uncertain. Policymakers are not addressing it. Universities are still on their way, making things happen the way it was before, not for the future. So in this particular context, if you talk about the risk, I find that the risk is the relevance of higher education towards the generations coming on board. The concept that we have now is about concept of making everything very economically centric. And I've got an acronym for this. I call it WEIRD. W stands for Western. Westernized means not in the sense of location, but in the sense of what happened in the Western world when Industrial Revolution started. I think Industrial Revolution is the one that turns everything over. education becomes systematically made into a factory, that we are all human capitals, where we are produced just to work for the economy. And therefore, E for me is economic centric. Everybody talks about education in terms of economy. And sometimes the economy does not work, especially in the third world country, because of so many other reasons. We miss, well, although we talk about people-oriented, the people orientation is not there. It's basically about things, it's only about finances and stuff like that. And hence it becomes industrial-led. And for us, if you want to offer a course, for example, we are asked to check with the market, whether the market wants this course or not. If it's not marketable, then we don't offer. So social sciences, humanities, philosophy are not even taught in universities nowadays. All the commercial part, the ITs and the stuff like that are being taught. And then it becomes at the end of the day, very dehumanizing. At the end of the day, we become a product, we sell our student for the market. And now suddenly the market closed because of COVID, then we do not know what to do. And the students are left in the lurch. The university cannot close down like the industry. And therefore, we are now looking at all this in the context whether the industry, the economy model is a relevant model for us moving forward. And therefore, the opportunity for us is to reset, to reshape and repurpose higher education the way it was. So I am really very excited when you talk about people-oriented. We have got a document now produced for our own, what we call humanizing education. We think that people must go through the education to be human again. And this is what we see that is lacking in COVID-19. We do not know what is it that we want to do as a human being when solidarity is so important, when humanity is so important, and yet you see people taking things at their own will, at their own pace, sometimes within their own context, that jeopardize and undermine the whole survival of human being because they find that the COVID is not being able to attended to. So these are issues which I think which is very global, which is very relevant, and is very, very timely for us to sit and think. And this is where the context that I find higher education needs to move forward. I do agree it is people-oriented. I do agree it is about life rather than livelihood. Right? So we need to bring this back into the equation so that youngsters like Zamzam have got a better future. We have spoiled it. My generation has spoiled it. I'm sorry, but somebody needs to fix it. And I am sorry that generation like Zamzam need to think about it, and we need to help them to think for the future of what it's going to be about. So that's my take on this. And there are a lot of works to be done if you need to revise the whole idea of higher education the way we want it to be for humanity and for mankind in moving forward.
Thank you so much, Zul. I was looking at you. I was looking at Zamzam. She's nodding her head. She probably has a lot of things to add to your thoughts. And you are truly a thought leader. I knew why we invited you also for this panel, to bring a bit of spice and some provocative, not provocative points, but points to reflect and really critically to reflect. And especially in the COVID-19, I mean, we are all lacking the human connection, but we don't have currently this human-centered education, which we actually need because we focus in some ways maybe on the wrong issues. I have here some questions. I'll ask you later to answer it, but if I could ask our audience, please, to write down also maybe where you come from. I can identify your name, I can pronounce your name maybe, but still the country I can only guess. So that would be nice. Zamzam, please add to our discussion here.
I mean, absolutely. I think, I already echoed and agree with a lot actually what was said, for the simple sense that actually the biggest risk to the education sector is that it's completely losing its purpose, right? The commodification of our education system is moving towards a systemized and processed form of education, when actually education systems are meant to be social goods, right? I mean, they're meant to be systems that benefit the community, that benefit the other society. And actually, we're moving away from that. And as we move away from that, the purpose of universities come into question. And I think it's a very, very fundamental question to ask, and something that has been asked over time. And I think what COVID-19 has done is more or less speed that process up when universities shut down. And then there was a question of actually, I'm able to access a course from another place because of location, or even accessing courses in different universities. And I think there's benefits in the internationalization of our education systems. But of course, there is there has to be a link and an understanding. And for me, it revolves around transforming education, right? It comes around re-understanding and re-establishing what our education system is meant to do and how it's supposed to purpose, right? And so when you have courses like the professor was saying, in the sense of like the humanities courses being wiped, and it's because those courses don't fundamentally make money, right? There's a clear link of the economic benefit between certain courses, when actually from a societal perspective, we know full well that we need to have courses available. We need to, and actually one of the I think for me, one of the most powerful things for the education sector specifically, the higher education sector specifically, is that we know that most of the world, because of the impact of the pandemic, is going to be heading towards a economic crisis, right? But and the only way we get out of an economic crisis is by retraining. It is by reskilling our workforce, right? And that fundamentally requires universities to be able to be agile. It requires universities to be able to change and adapt. And so actually, to me, the concept of the changing classroom is dangerous, because we're not moving towards completely transforming our education. We're moving the opposite way in commodification of our education systems. And so, without repeating what's already been said, I absolutely echo those thoughts. And actually, the worry is that actually universities will cease to exist in a couple of years, and actually will be dissolved into businesses, will be dissolved into different entities. And I think that is a terrifying concept to start thinking about, in the sense of actually we're already seeing that in courses, we're already seeing that in different modules, and in the concept of like university degrees being adopted into actually workforces, and students being exploited for a year and working for external companies without getting actually any qualifications or support from their institution. So I think it's a terrifying space that we're moving into in terms of the purpose of our education system.
Thank you so much, Samsung. So instead of transforming education, we are moving towards a commodification of education. We have lost a little bit the purpose of education. There's a question by Dr. Mohamed Akhtar Udin. Is it really possible to continue education, leaving no one behind during the COVID-19 pandemic? Allow me as a moderator to answer this question. I'm an optimist and I say yes, but I want our speakers now to commit to it and share with us what are the priorities of your institution to make this a yes, and how can this happen? What are your initiatives? And maybe we go a little bit more practical to the details. I think I saw also a question by Nishat Rias. Ensuring equitable access is not easy. Could you share how to achieve this in perhaps 3 or 4 ideas, or are there any quick wins? Maybe that can be integrated also in your answers. So now the question in particular, what are the key priorities of your respective organizations, institutions to enhance inclusion, diversity, equity, to ensure that we are really transforming the education process and education systems for social goods? Elaborate a little bit on this. Maybe Samsung, you would like to start right now, please.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. I guess from my perspective, of course, absolutely there is hope. And that is what drives us, and that's what continues us to ensure that we continue to campaign for social good, to continue to campaign for a transformative education system, right? We know that we're moving into a digitalized era, and that's not something that we should be afraid of. And I think there are a huge benefit in actually tackling the big barrier of socioeconomic young people who are unable to access education, actually. And I think one of the great opportunities of actually digitalizing education systems, and of course, there are huge infrastructures that needs to be put behind this. There is a lot of investment that needs to happen for young people and anyone that wants to access education to be able to access education. So actually, for me, the digitalization of education systems is a fundamental part of actually removing a systemic barrier, specifically around poverty. But actually, for me, when we talk about inclusion and diversity, something that has worked as an anti-racist organizer for a couple of years now, it's really important to understand the experience of marginalized groups, right? And to never group them as one homogenized group, right? There isn't like this one inclusion and diversity framework or system that I can give you that works. Absolutely not. There are completely different lived experiences based of area in which country they live in, which community they live in, even in a localized perspective. the race plays a factor, the gender plays a factor, and so there are, and age plays a factor. There's so many different layers and barriers and systemic barriers that we need to understand, and that have different impacts on a local scale, on a national scale, on an international scale, and understanding those is a very fundamental part of trying to pick this apart. So if we look at our higher education institutions and try to work them towards becoming just systems, we need to understand that, for example, you can't introduce one layer of framework. And one of the things that when I was in the UK, I supported in was this 2 modes of program. One of the programs focused directly on the experience of BAME students being Black, Asian, and minority students. And there was a framework that allowed institutions to get a charter based off the work that they were doing. But the work had to be led by people of color in their institutions. And it had to be paid, it had to be supported, and the institution needed to commit financially and also as a huge part of their program to be able to identify issues that those students face on their campus. And I think when it comes to dealing with such systemic issues, we need to really understand, and there needs to be a clear communication between students on our campuses, right? Students on these clients that come in, students are fundamentally a part of the ecosystem. Without them, our institutions won't exist, right? And so actually, instead of bartering with them and pretending like they're a chip that we don't need, the reality is students are fundamental to making the change that we need to see, right? And there's change that will benefit our institutions as well. We know that data has shown that institutions that take on and have committed to tackling inclusion and diversity on their campuses have had an increase of engagement, have an increase has had an increase in their students' results, and actually therefore it benefits the institution to be able to make sure that their institution is reflective of the society in which they're in. And so for me, I think it's a very, very important and fundamental example in ensuring that we look at the different tools available, we share and collaborate with organizations, but actually fundamentally we bring young people in and we let them, rather than tokenizing them and bringing them to the table, we really let them lead and take the leadership and be able to identify what their campus should look like and what the issues and the concerns are within their institutions.
Fantastic initiatives. Very good that you share them with us. I also heard something earlier. There is diversity in the diversity. So we have to go several layers down, and very often not one framework fits all. One size fits all. It's never the case. Jewel, do you have similar initiatives in your? One second. Can I combine it with one question here from the audience by Ramiro Bautista? Maybe you can address this at the same time. Again, to the audience, please also write down from which country you're from. That makes it a bit more inclusive, and we know how wide we spread with this conference. Ramiro is asking what strategies can be introduced to small universities for equity purposes in this pandemic. So maybe you can weave this in also in your response and share with us similar activities as Zamzam has mentioned.
Thank you. I believe the principle is education is a leveler of society. I think that's a principle that we cannot compromise. In other words, people who are educated will be able to lift themselves out of poverty, to live similar with other people because education levels them up. Now education is no longer a leveler of society. I think education now, if at all, creates a lot more inequity, because of the accommodation that Zamzam talked about, and also because of the whole structure that is organized on merits of economic, the logics of economic, rather than the wisdom of education and such. Now, the solution, I think, is there. When we go back to UNESCO 4 pillars of learning, learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. Now, we are good in learning to know and learning to do. This is why we are so economically very vibrant, but we are very poor at learning to be and learning to live together. I think nobody have been taught about learning to be and learning to live together, when fundamentally this is what COVID is telling us. Who are you as a human person that you can, interact with other people, learning their culture, learning their values, learning your own values, and how do you interact and make humanity that level of society that everybody wants to achieve for. So those are the things that we have missed. I think if we needs to bring it back, then I think you can get what we are trying to add closer at the human orientation kind of education. That I can now relate with Zamzam, I can relate with His Excellency, because we are human beings. not because we are from the same nationality or same color or same race, which has been been talking about for many times. And when you see now all Black Lives Matters or all life matters, this we begin to see disparities in the most advanced economy. I'm very shocked to see this because I thought they're democratic, they're well advanced, and I thought mentally they're also well advanced, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because education is systematically racist in its context, and it has been well camouflaged that all us believe that the so-called world-class university are all world-class in its totality. Now we are seeing that this world-class university is another cliche that hides a lot of things. Some of the university are built by slave traders, and they are still looked upon as a world-class university. These things needs to be questioned now. This thing needs to be scrutinized, and we can recreate a new kind of university that have all this thing. I mean, many of the questions is how do you create equity? To us now in my university, we have changed the whole paradigm. We call it humanizing education. In other words, everybody now needs to work with anybody outside the university, especially in the community. We are moved to is the one that suffers the most when COVID comes in. Industry may flourish, economy may be good, but when it comes to a crunch like this, the community comes and helps us in the supermarket, they are closed. So now we are working very closely with the community, bringing community on board, and we know that there are a lot of wisdom in the community that we've missed. The kind of balance that they have got, the sustainability thing that we talked about are very much alive in our community, especially the rural community, especially the community that has been there in the context of being communal rather than segregated as we see in the urban areas. So there are many things that I think we can learn. None of these are new. So that's why when you talk about new normal, I would tend to say a renewed normal. Let's go and revisit some of the things that we have done good before, but we have left it out because of some factors, economic in its entirety perhaps, and politics to a certain extent. Now the university needs to come back and see what we have missed and how do you bring back into the mainstream, including indigenous knowledge. We learned a lot more from the indigenous people, how they survive in the COVID. They do not suffer like us because they are very independent in their way of living. They are very sort of sustainable in their way of living. They don't have the excessive demands of consumerism like we do. Now we need to come back, we need to scale down our lifestyle, which we think is a modern lifestyle, but at the end of the day, it is not. So there are solutions, but we need to be humble enough to go back and understand these are the mistakes that we have made, let's go back. Some people, the idea of going back seems to be retrogressive, but to me, not necessarily so. When you look at sustainable development, many communities have adopted sustainable development 1,000 years before. We did a good study in Bali. Bali has got the concept of sustainable development for 900 years before we talk about it, in 1987. And they've sustained it for a long time. So if we are humble enough to go back and understand what we have missed in the context of heritage, words like Ubuntu, for example, means a lot. We've got another word called Sejahtera. But where is Ubuntu, where is Sejahtera? They are not modern terms, and therefore they're just thrown aside. And these are the key words that we need to bring back in education and contextualize education in the 4 pillars of learning. If I just want to add, learning, now UNESCO is talking about learning to become. So not just being, what are we going to become? And that is a very crucial question. Where is the university taking us to become what? I think that's a question that all of us need to ask and ponder, and I hope we can find a solution at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jewel. We called this conference Outlook 2030, but you're totally right. We should also look back, have enough space to look back. Jewel, you said education is a level of society. You highlighted the wisdom of communities. ASEAN community, 10 nations. His Excellency, maybe you can give us a regional overview of the key priorities, concrete, practical activities, projects on the ground on inclusion and diversity, and how we can have an outlook for 2030, but integrating what is behind us in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I find the discussion very enriching. Actually, I think we are kind of broadening the scope of discussions, not just, on the digitalization of education systems and all that, but also going back to the root of the education itself. And I'm very happy to see, such movement coming from the universities themselves. And I'm sure, this kind of topic is something that, the Asean University Network and, many universities in the region, can continue to have conversations on. In some ways, I, would want to echo with both Professor, Razak and Zamzam. In a way, some of the ways that we are thinking about what kind of education system we should have in the regions are also conditioned by this economic perspectives as well. Whether this is some things that will be allowed the student to find a good job in the future. So you wouldn't be surprised if you go to the document, you will find a lot of words referring to 21st century skills or the fourth industrial revolution and so on. But in a way, I think that in recent years, the conversation is also going to a different directions as well. For example, you look at the document, the key documents that are shaping the future directions of the education system in ASEAN regions. It is not just about the 21st century skills, but also focusing on the kinds of skills that allow our students to be able to learn, to adapt, to change very quickly, and also to be a more productive force in terms of advancing other social goods in the regions. Now it's not just about 21st century skills that we're looking at. We're also bringing in concept of circular economy. We're bringing in concept of environmental sustainabilities and so on. And for example, the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, there are 5 pillars, and 2 pillars of the 5 focus on environment and inclusive digital development in the region. So I can say, to some extent, the conversation is moving toward that directions, and also, how the whole process of building the community will benefit all groups of people here. I have to also, say is that there are a couple of documents that are addressing different needs of people. We have the enabling master plan that is, some things to support persons with disabilities. And now, we are working on this, gender outlook, and some of the recommendations will shape the way for us on how we can support, vulnerable population and so on. But I agree that, we can be more specific, we can be more strategic on how we can, assist different groups of people to be able to benefit from the community process. I wouldn't deny that everything is going perfectly, being an inclusive and diverse community is still our aspirations. I would say it's a long road for us, to achieve that goal. But then again, if we look at the whole, processes of integrations and community building process, I think we are moving in that direction. And other things I would like to also bring into this discussions as well. The job here is not just, to address the equity questions at the national level, but also at the regional level as well. There are different capability and capacity questions among the ASEAN member states. So us, a regional organizations and ASEAN Secretariat, as the name suggests, we are providing all of the support to ASEAN member state to make sure that it's not just, narrowing the gap at the national level, but at the regional level as well. For example, specifically on education sector, we're trying to, introduce this concept of harmonization, but this is not a homogenization. It's not trying to establish a single system or something, but making it easy for university and the region to support one another so that they can grow together, especially for students who have an opportunity to move around, learn different things. And like Professor Razak just mentioned, this is not about thinking of ASEAN as a place that one day you will have a career that will pay you a lot of money, but also some things that you can appreciate as part of community. Learning about culture, people, language, tradition. There's so many things that people can learn from all of this, and that's why I have to say is that through our partnership with the EU, the SHARE program, students have that opportunity to move around and learn different things, not just skill, but also life skills and their appreciation for the culture, diversities, traditions, and people, and so on. And I think that would be the healthy way for us to build this community, not just to keep pouring on the students all of this necessary skills and knowledge and so on. I think we are moving in that direction. Perhaps you might say that it's a bit slow. We are trying, and it's good, to hear a different perspective from different stakeholders. Again, at the regional level, there are things we can do, but most of the actions are happening at the national level. And this is something that I would also like to emphasize. But as the secretariat to all the member states, it is our hope that we continue to advocate for this, and they will do more, walk the talk, and get most of the things done, so that the true aspirations of inclusion and diversity will be there. It's not just in the document that we are producing every year.
Thank you so much, His Excellency. On the topic of homogenization and harmonization, there's an interesting question in our chat, and I read it loud. It's by Jens Franz. He agrees with Jules and Samsam about the problem of neoliberalism and market orientation at the expense of humanist values and equality. But looking at how these concepts are implemented in Asian universities, a lot of them are through EU-ASEAN cooperation and policies borrowing from Western concepts. So how to avoid the wrong kind of borrowing? Jules, I ask you to think a little bit about it and then respond, and maybe His Excellency as well, Samsung too. But let me share a few other interesting questions here. A question from Choltis Diratiti, who is the director of the AUN, ASEAN University Network. Do you have any comment on equity and women in the ASEAN context? Also very important in our discussion, but maybe that can be picked up later. We have a very practical question from Myanmar. How can we pace up our progress of digital literacy in developing countries? We have a question here, also practical question from Baburam Timsina. Will you please share any log frame that we can make a base for applying equitable approaches in the academia, if any? Some of these questions, maybe also participants can connect on our conference platform WOVA, or also on YouTube, and share some ideas and to help and guide each other. That's also an intention of this conference, to bring together good practices and share knowledge. So, but maybe we are using these last two questions from Jens Franz on the borrowing of the right methods and the right EU-ASEAN cooperation or EU-Asia cooperation. And if anybody would like to comment on equity and women in the ASEAN context and inclusion, then please also go ahead. But Samsam, you can also talk about this from a European context. We have 4 more minutes to go. Keep it short. Each of you 1.5 minutes, please.
Okay, let me try with the first question. I think I am in a way disappointed with ASEAN in the sense that ASEAN should be more assertive in its well-being, in its image. I mean, if I were to talk about the official language of ASEAN is English, I would expect some ASEAN language to start off with. We already surrender our language to I know it's an international language, but yet we have got the French speaks French when they speak, the Germans speak German when they speak, and we need to speak English. Why do we need to speak English? Our diversity of language is fantastic, it's phenomenal. Bahasa Malaysia, Bahasa Indonesia alone, I think there's 600 million people speak those languages. But you can't even lift that up to be a common language for ASEAN and still want to borrow the language of the West. It's not that we can't do this, but that's the kind of knowledge that we have. Within the language, there is a knowledge by itself. I mean, I think you probably know what durian is all about. If I give you an example of a durian, unless you taste durian, you'll not be able to speak about durian. A language is like that. Unless you speak the language, you'll never be able to taste how good the language is. Yeah? Now, then we go into a kind of a mindset that we think education is a one-size-fits-all. And therefore, we look at models outside our country, and we do not, our region, that we do not know, for example, the University of Nalanda, which is there in the 5th century in India, is one of the most progressive universities, if you think about it. They've got a library so huge at that particular time that people go out and educate the community around them. They have got a kind of a system that is not rhetorical or not, what you call memorization. They a different kind of a university that was well before even the Greeks. But we don't even want to invest time to understand this method of education within our own region. And therefore, we keep on borrowing others. The moment you borrow people, then you become colonized. And I saw one question about neoliberal and colonization. And in fact, this is the unhappiness that we've got now. The whole system here is a fake system that is imposed on us, that we lose our indigenous language, our indigenous culture, our indigenous values and wisdom at the same time. And therefore, we become just another university, a second-rate university, because we are borrowing from other people.
Thank you, Jules. I first pass the floor to Samsung because I think His Excellency might need a few moments to think about a good answer to that. Samsung, do you please short and crisp?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think from I suppose for me, from the perspective of recognizing the fact that I've grown up in Europe and I work in the European context, and understanding and knowing actually the colonial remnants that our education system has and has then like echoed across the world in the system and in the way in which we speak about like first class education systems existing, for example, in the UK. And we know the barriers and like fundamentally like our education systems were set up for white and middle class people, right? And our education system as a framework has actually not changed. Everything else around us has changed, but this framework and who it sets to serve hasn't changed. And what's happened is that we've replicated those models as a form of excellence education across multiple countries. So of course, I wholeheartedly agree in the sense that like the context and when we homogenize what education systems are and how we receive education, we actually do a disservice to our communities, we do a disservice to ourselves, and we completely miss the mark of what an education system should be and who it should serve. And I think from the perspective, there's a difference between borrowing and there's a difference between learning, right? And I think there is a huge benefit in learning from each other, but understanding how those different systems are going to differ, right? And like being able to identify how this system worked here, but actually what are the key factors that is going to make sure that I need to tweak for it to work for my community and for my country. And I think that's something that we often don't do when we do partnerships and we work together on multiple projects. And I think the most important thing is understanding the baggage that education systems in Europe come with, right? And understanding actually how often sometimes dangerous it can be to bring us a different mindset that doesn't fit a community and doesn't work for that community. And I think it is, but of course, collaboration and working together is important, but I think there is, of course, and I wholeheartedly agree, an importance that needs to be placed on the community in the context in which it's being delivered in, and the people need to lead that, and the people, specifically young people, I'm always going to echo, need to be a part of that transformation and understanding and identifying those systemic issues that affect them and their communities and their localities, rather than thinking on a European dimension.
Thank you, Samsung. I'm very happy, Dr. Kumfok, that you have worked in academia and the government and to bring this together, because we have to talk about systemic issues. And we bring this now together back to inclusion, diversity, and equity. A last word from you, a last thought to close this panel discussion, and then I'll hand over back to Miguel.
Thank you very much. Perhaps it's a long, last word here, because I think there's some issues that I need to also address here. Well, the suggestion from Professor Raza is not a difficult one. I totally agree with you. Perhaps our founding father agree on the use of language is our practicality, but I've been also advocating for this for quite some time as well. If not, the use of the language of the ASEAN member state in the official meeting or something, but at least, some of the official document, we should do something about it. Now we are producing the ASEAN magazine, and my hope that, we can, make this into the local languages of all the ASEAN member states so people can learn more about what we are doing. And that hopefully a momentum, that other member states will want to take on and do it in a more comprehensive way, and perhaps one day we have different languages at the meeting table. Perhaps on the issues of borrowing the idea from the EU or partners, some of the works that we're working together are providing a lot of benefit for us, And we derive some of the vision or aspiration from those collaborations as well. For example, through the EU share programs, and now we are developing our own Asean scholarship. Hopefully is going to be launched next year, and that way our people can also benefit from our own initiative, not just depends on the contribution from our EU partner on this mobility program and so on. But of course, when it comes to some other project, there's always a close consultation between the EU and ASEAN member state. Another things which is also in line with what Professor Razak just mentioned is that it's important that we own the thinking of how we want to develop our region. And that's the reason why we publish, the first ASEAN Development Outlook. And it happens to be the case that the theme for our first outlook is on inclusion and sustainability. So I strongly encourage everyone to look at it. Of course, the people who write that report are coming from different parts of the world, but it still represents the perspective of ASEAN member state, what we can do, what we need to do, from our own, lenses and so on. Now, the last questions on how we can promote gender equality when it comes to access to education. I can say is that actually we have all the tools, we have all the policies, we have all the ideas and everything. We've been making some progress on this front, but we need to just do more, invest more, and walk the talk. I don't think that we are lack of all of those solutions, providing support for women so that they can go to school, protect the rights and well-being of women, especially domestic violence and all that, changing attitude, mindset. I think we have a lot of documents out there, right? I mean, the most important task for us now is not to just sit on those documents, put the money in, do something about it. I'm sure there will be some progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful. We put out not a document, we put out a collaboration later, the ARC8 Outlook report, but we will hand this document and report over to the policymakers. So your word, hopefully in their ears, make out of this document concrete actions. Thank you so much. And I would like to hand over back to our moderator, Miguel. I say thank you and terima kasih sekali.
Sama-sama.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Plenty of food for thought. Thank you, Leonie. Thank you to our audience for your very engaging questions. And thank you to our distinguished panelists. It is wonderful to learn more about our shared principles across Asia and Europe. We now close the first session of the conference program and we'll have a quick health break. And from there, move to the second session of the program, which includes the launch of the ARC8 Outlook Report 2030, Inclusive and Diverse Higher Education in Asia and Europe, and the presentation of the ASEM National Equity Policies. For everyone who is on the conference platform, please visit the agenda section and move to the session for the launch of the ARC8 Outlook Report 2030. If you're on YouTube, simply stay tuned to this YouTube live stream. Last but not least, for those participants who wish to receive a certificate of attendance, the letter of our ARC8 anagram is the letter A for Amsterdam, the capital of Netherlands. Again, thank you again to our panelists for this amazing discussion.